Right now, as you're watching this, a volcanic system in eastern California, one that most Americans have never heard of by name, but that has quietly been the most closely watched caldera in the country for the last 44 years, has just produced a seismic swarm of a scale and character scientists have not documented since the crisis year of 1982. And the community sitting directly on top of it. Tens of thousands of ski visitors at any given moment. Learned about it from a USGS bulletin issued at 6 o'clock on the morning of August 18, 2026. The volcano is not a volcano in the way most people picture one. It is a caldera, a vast collapsed volcanic basin, 20 kilometers east to west and 11 kilometers north to south, whose eastern rim rises abruptly out of California's Owens Valley and whose western rim is dominated by the ski slopes of Mammoth Mountain. Its name is Long Valley Caldera. It formed 767,000 years ago in one of the largest volcanic eruptions in the geological history of North America, the Bishop Tuff eruption, which ejected an estimated 750 cubic kilometers of magma, blanketed much of the western United States in ash, and left the ground surface in Long Valley collapsed by more than a kilometer into the empty space where the magma chamber had been. That collapsed basin, resurgent domes and all, is the terrain that Mammoth Lakes was built on top of, and it has never truly stopped moving. Since the beginning of August 2026, the Northern California Seismic System and the USGS California Volcano Observatory have been recording an escalating swarm of earthquakes beneath the caldera's south moat and the flanks of Mammoth Mountain. As of the August 18th bulletin, over 2,400 individual events have been recorded since August 1st, including 9 earthquakes above magnitude 3.5 and 1 magnitude 4.7 felt by residents across Mammoth Lakes and by ski patrol staff working at the Mammoth Mountain summit chairlift the afternoon it occurred. Ground deformation instruments show renewed uplift of the caldera's resurgent dome, the central structural high inside the caldera, accelerating from its long baseline background rate. Carbon dioxide emissions from the Mammoth Mountain area, which have been elevated since a mass tree kill was first attributed to soil CO2 in the early 1990s, have measurably increased, and the seismic swarm's location, its depth clustering, and its rate, the sheer number of events per week, is beyond anything recorded at Long Valley since the 1982 crisis. But that made the caldera a household name in the volcanology community and a very bad word in Mammoth Lake's town council meetings for a generation afterward. The current activity is not an eruption. It may never become one. The California Volcano Observatory's language is careful, calibrated, and honest, but it explicitly describes the current swarm as the most significant unrest observed at Long Valley Caldera since the 1983 crisis period. The specific phrase in the August 18th bulletin that scientists, journalists, and community leaders across California woke up to this morning. Today we break down what Long Valley Caldera is and why a caldera behaves differently from the stratovolcanoes and chill volcanoes we usually cover, exactly what happened in 1980 through 1993 that permanently changed how the USGS communicates. Volcano warnings to the American public, the specific hazard at Mammoth Mountain that has already killed people in this century without any eruption occurring, one of the greatest predicted volcanic eruptions in modern history, and what it teaches about what warnings can accomplish when institutions and communities trust each other, and what a resort town of 8,000 permanent residents and millions of annual visitors needs to reckon with when the ground beneath its ski lifts finally speaks up again after 4 decades. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the volcanology, the record, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Are you in Mammoth Lakes, the Eastern Sierra, June Lake, Bishop, or anywhere in the Long Valley region? Have you skied Mammoth Mountain, hiked the caldera rim, seen the dead trees around Horseshoe Lake with your own eyes? Tell me your connection to the area and be honest. Before this video, had you ever heard of Long Valley Caldera at all? Because Long Valley is one of the youngest, largest, and most closely watched supervolcano class systems in the United States, and its name recognition among the American public is a small fraction of Yellowstone's. Despite the science being more directly relevant to a specific populated place, subscribe right now if you want every California Volcano Observatory bulletin, every Long Valley development, and every major American volcano story covered as it happens, completely free. A thumbs up puts us in front of the Mammoth Lakes community and the Eastern Sierra residents who need to understand what their ground is doing right now. Let us go for 6,000 likes. Now, let us meet the volcano hiding in plain sight beneath one of California's most popular ski resorts. Calderas are the class of volcano that forms when the roof of a magma chamber collapses into the emptied space left by an enormous eruption. The eruption itself is often catastrophic. The Bishop Tuff eruption that formed Long Valley is estimated at a volcanic explosivity index of 7, in the same category as Krakatoa 1883 or Tambora 1815, and larger than either by volume. What remains after the eruption is a topographic bowl, often tens of kilometers across. With a partially solidified magmatic system still present underneath, some calderas, Yellowstone is the most famous, have produced multiple caldera-forming events over millions of years. Others erupt once and never again. What all active calderas share is the potential for continued activity on scales far below the caldera-forming event itself: dome-building eruptions, smaller vent eruptions, hydrothermal activity, and the constant restless motion of a magma chamber that has never fully solidified. Long Valley is textbook active. Since the caldera-forming event 767,000 years ago, it has produced multiple smaller eruptions from various vents inside and around the caldera rim. The most recent significant magmatic eruptions came from the Inyo-Mano volcanic chain along the west rim, dated at approximately 700 years ago, well within the time frame of Paiute oral history for the region. Mammoth Mountain itself, on the southwestern rim, is a young composite volcano whose most recent magmatic activity was roughly 57,000 years ago, but whose hydrothermal system has produced small, phreatic explosions as recently as 700 years ago. The caldera is not a fossil. Its background seismicity, its ongoing gas emissions, and its continuing ground deformation all reflect an active magmatic and hydrothermal system operating in slow motion. Beneath tens of thousands of people who live and ski above it, the 1983 crisis is the specific reason Long Valley became a permanent case study in volcano hazard communication, and the reason the current swarm's comparison to that period matters so much. In May 1984, earthquakes above magnitude 6 struck the southern rim of the caldera within a 48-hour period. Simultaneously, geodetic instruments detected uplift of the central resurgent dome at rates that had not been observed in the observational record. USGS scientists interpreted the combination as consistent with a magma intrusion into the shallow subsurface, and in 1982, the agency issued a formal Notice of Potential Volcanic Hazard for the area. The community's response was not the response the USGS had anticipated. Mammoth Lake's business community, dependent on ski tourism, reacted with public outrage. The town's economy took a measurable hit. The elected mayor accused the USGS of causing more damage with warnings than any eruption ever had. Real estate values dropped, national media coverage was intense and often sensationalized, and the eruption that the notice had been designed to warn against did not occur. The swarm subsided. Uplift continued at slower rates through the following 2 decades, and by the mid-1980s, the crisis had effectively ended without an eruptive climax. That outcome, a scientifically appropriate warning followed by no eruption, permanently reshaped how the USGS communicates volcanic unrest to the American public. It taught the agency that warnings issued to communities dependent on tourism carry economic weight that must be considered in the communication strategy, even when the warnings are scientifically warranted. It also taught the volcanological community that a magma intrusion detected at depth does not necessarily produce an eruption at the surface, that intrusions can stall, cool, and never reach the vent geometry required to erupt. The Long Valley 1982 experience is still cited today in USGS internal documentation as a case study in the communication challenges of volcanic hazard warnings, and it is exactly the shadow the August 18, 2026 bulletin is being read against, a document written with the awareness that the last comparable episode at this specific caldera ended without eruption, changed careers, and set precedents for how the science community talks about active but non-erupting volcanoes. Now, the specific hazard at Mammoth Mountain that has already killed people in the century without any eruption, the one the current increase in CO2 emissions makes concrete. In the early 1990s, forest ecologists working on the flanks of Mammoth Mountain noticed unusual patterns of tree mortality, patches of dead conifers on otherwise healthy slopes. Soil sampling revealed carbon dioxide concentrations in the root zone, approaching 90% by volume, high enough to displace the oxygen that tree roots require. The source was traced to diffuse magmatic CO2 seeping upward from the Mammoth Mountain hydrothermal system through faults and fractures, accumulating in soils and low-lying topographic depressions. The mountain has been quietly emitting between 50 and 150 tons of CO2 per day from these areas for the past 3 decades, killing roughly 100 acres of forest and creating localized zones where oxygen depletion at ground level is a genuine, invisible, and immediately lethal hazard. In April 2006, a ski patrol officer at Mammoth Mountain ski area died after falling into a fumarole depression in the snow, a warm cavity created by geothermal heat melting an air pocket beneath the snowpack filled with CO2-heavy air. He was overcome by the atmosphere in the pocket and could not climb out. His death, and a similar incident involving 3 ski patrollers who died in a fumarole cavity in 2006, are the specific casualties that have made Mammoth Mountain's fumarole and gas vent zones marked, fenced, and monitored areas within the ski resort's operations. The current increase in CO2 flux from these areas, measurable in real time by the USGS's automated instruments, is the same category of hazard that killed those patrol officers, and it is escalating alongside the seismic swarm. The volcano has already killed skiers at Mammoth Mountain without ever erupting. Now, the contrast that most directly frames what the current unrest may or may not mean, because the world contains one of the greatest examples of a caldera reawakening handled correctly, and that example is not American. The town of Rabaul, on the island of New Britain in Papua New Guinea, sat inside a volcanic caldera whose last major eruption had occurred in 1937. In the years leading up to 1994, Rabaul Volcanological Observatory scientists monitored increasing tilt, seismicity, and gas emissions from the caldera's 2 major vents, Tavurvur and Vulcan. On September 18, 1994, precursory signals accelerated sharply, and observatory scientists communicated to civil authorities that an eruption was imminent. Approximately 30,000 to 50,000 residents were evacuated from Rabaul in advance of the eruption. In the roughly 24 hours between the observatory's escalation and the volcanic climax, beginning early on September 19th, both Tavurvur and Vulcan erupted simultaneously in Vulcanian-Plinian events that destroyed most of Rabaul town within hours and continued for weeks. The town's role as regional capital was permanently ended. The government was relocated to Kokopo, further from the caldera. The confirmed direct death toll from one of the most explosive eruptions of the late 20th century, 5 people, most from lightning strikes, generated by the ash plume rather than from direct volcanic effects. 5 deaths from a caldera reawakening that could have killed tens of thousands in a scenario without the observatory's warning and the government's willingness to act on it. Rabaul 1994 is now taught in every volcanological program on Earth as one of the greatest predicted eruptions in modern history, and as proof that caldera monitoring done seriously, communicated honestly, and acted on institutionally can produce outcomes that were mostly impossible in the pre-instrumented era. Long Valley in 2026 is not Rabaul in 1994. The current unrest is smaller, the precursors do not indicate an imminent eruption, and the observatory has explicitly not raised its alert level to warning status. But the 2 cases share the essential feature: a caldera showing renewed unrest above a populated area, monitored in real time by a scientific institution whose interpretation must be communicated to a community that will experience real economic and psychological effects from either underplaying the situation or overplaying it. What Long Valley 1982 taught the USGS about the dangers of overplaying is real. What Rabaul 1994 taught the world about the dangers of underplaying is also real. And the August 18, 2026 bulletin, with its explicit reference to the 1980-1983 crisis, is the observatory attempting to communicate scientifically appropriate concern to a community that remembers the previous crisis differently than the science community remembers it. Let us be direct about the practical message, because information without action is just anxiety. If you are visiting Mammoth Mountain or the Eastern Sierra in the coming weeks or months, respect all posted closures at fumarole zones, gas vent areas, and marked hazard sites on the mountain. The CO2 hazard is real, has killed skiers, and does not require an eruption to produce fatalities, only your presence in an accumulation zone at the wrong moment. Stay on march runs and trails. Ski patrol closures exist for reasons the closures themselves cannot always explain, and the current increase in gas emissions is exactly the situation that would prompt expanded closures. If you live in Mammoth Lakes or nearby communities in Mono County, the primary risk from the current unrest, in the scenarios the USGS considers most probable, is not a magmatic eruption. It is escalation of the seismic activity to larger events. The 1919 IED sequence included 4 magnitude 6 earthquakes, which would produce building shaking, rockfall risk in the eastern Sierra terrain, and infrastructure disruption. Standard earthquake preparation applies. Secure heavy furniture, know your gas shutoff, keep 72 hours of supplies. If you live within the caldera itself and near the actively deforming areas, monitor USGS California Volcano Observatory bulletins directly rather than relying on secondhand coverage. For visitors and residents alike, do not draw conclusions from social media coverage of Long Valley activity, which historically has tended toward sensationalism during unrest periods. The USGS and California Volcano Observatory issue their communications directly and in accessible language, and their assessments are the appropriate primary source for what the science actually says. Final thought. Long Valley Caldera has been in a state of slow, low-grade unrest for 46 years, since the May 1980 earthquake sequence first announced that this ancient volcanic system was not sleeping as deeply as most Americans had assumed. Through those 46 years, the ground has risen, the seismic swarms have come and gone, the CO2 has quietly killed acres of trees, and, in 2006, the ski patrollers who fell into gas-filled snow cavities. Through all of that, no magmatic eruption has occurred, and the community above the caldera has learned to live with the awareness that its ground moves in ways that require constant scientific attention. The August 2026 swarm is the largest signal Long Valley has produced in that entire span. It may resolve without escalation, exactly as the 1982 crisis eventually did. Or it may be the first phase of something that finally produces an eruption from a system that has been building toward one, slowly, for decades. And the honest scientific position from the observatory, from the researchers who have spent their careers on this caldera, from the volcanologists who reference Long Valley in their teaching, is that this specific pattern of activity carries enough uncertainty to warrant serious attention without warranting evacuation. That is exactly the range in which volcanic unrest is hardest to communicate and hardest for the affected community to receive. Rabaul in 1994 showed the world what serious monitoring and institutional courage can achieve when a caldera actually reawakens. Long Valley in 1992 showed what happens when a scientifically appropriate warning meets a community whose economic dependence on tourism cannot easily absorb the message. The current activity is being watched by scientists who remember both examples, in a community that remembers 1982 more sharply than the science community may fully appreciate. What happens next depends on the volcano, on the observatory, and on whether a resort town and the millions of visitors who pass through it each year can hold a mature relationship with a caldera whose behavior nobody living has ever seen at full expression. We will track every California Volcano Observatory update, every Long Valley bulletin, and every development in this system as it unfolds through the weeks and months ahead. Subscribe so you do not miss it. And leave that comment, your connection to the Eastern Sierra, your history with the caldera, and whether today changed how you think about the ground beneath Mammoth Mountain. Because a volcano that has been shaking quietly for 46 years just shook loudly, and the community above it deserves to have that fact met with something more thoughtful than the algorithm will otherwise deliver. 6,000 likes. Let us go.